Thank you, everybody, for coming today and braving the storm. So, good evening. I'm Susan Fisher-Sterling, the director of the National Museum of Women in the Arts, and it's my pleasure to welcome you to our Women's History Month Creatives Keynote with Sandra Jackson-Dumont. At NIMWA, we're committed to championing women and non-binary artists who influence and impact how we see and interact with the world. Tonight's conversation is particularly valuable because it highlights the power of narrative art, a force that has shaped and continues to shape our history and our culture, and the most important part, deepens our understanding of one another. Sandra Jackson-Dumont is known for her abilities to blur the lines and present new possibilities. She has spent her career redefining how museums engage with art and audiences, situating the needs of people within these institutional spaces rather than the other way around. She also has dedicated herself to integrating Blackness into her work, and her experience has included pivotal roles at institutions such as the Metropolitan Museum of Art, Seattle Art Museum, Studio Museum in Harlem, and the Whitney Museum of American Art. As the director and CEO of the Lucas Museum of Narrative Art, she has spent the past 4.5 years building a museum that centers visual storytelling, shaping a new institution that honors diverse voices, perspectives, and lived experiences. At least that's what we hope it will do. Tonight we'll hear Sandra's insights on the role of museums in fostering dialogue, the evolving landscape of curating, and how narrative art can serve as both a mirror and a window, reflecting our realities while opening new ways of seeing the world. Like all of you who've joined us this evening, I'm excited to hear more from Sandra about her approach and her insights. Following her presentation, she'll take questions from the audience. That will be moderated by Kelly Daly, NIMWA's Director of Public Programs. And after that inspiring conversation, I invite you to stay for a cocktail hour from 7 to 8 p.m., where we can continue to discuss in a more intimate setting. Lastly, I want to give a huge shout out to our Women Arts and Social Change Program sponsors for making this evening's program possible. Denise Littlefield Sobel, Dan and Gloria Logan, Mary Lou Dauray and Alan Davis, Susan and Jim Swartz, and Ann Edwards. And of course, thank you to Sandra for joining us this evening. All yours.
Good evening. It doesn't even feel like evening, does it? I'm like, we got a little more light in the day. I'm Sandra Jackson-Dumont again. I'm so honored to be here. I want to start by recognizing the Nocotchtank and the Anacostia and the Piscataway people, the first residents of the land that we now call the District of Columbia. We are taking up space in unceded territory, and today I offer my acknowledgement and respects to the people who were the original custodians of this space, to their elders past, present, and those to come. Thank you, Susan, for that very kind introduction. Thank you, Kelly, for your support. Thank you, Gabby. Thank you for the guy in the booth. I was raised by a Black woman from Mississippi, so I just thank everybody. Okay, it's a kind group, you laughed, okay. So I generally don't read my talks, and so we were talking about this a second ago, and I'm going to read in an animated way. I hope you won't feel like it's reading, but we talked about this building or this institution called the Lucas Museum, and today I'm here to talk about the power of visual storytelling and the power of museums. So I am honored by this invitation, and I'm honored to share a few thoughts on a subject that resonates deeply with me, the transformative power of visual storytelling, and the real pivotal role that museums play in society. So I'll begin with a little story. It's personal, and so in 2018, I was working at the Metropolitan Museum of Art in New York City. How many of you have been to this great place? Okay, yeah, that's good. It's amazing, and I was working there, and I would often leave work late, as any appropriate museum person would do. So you end up leaving work late, and you're working late hours. And at the time, we started raising our goddaughter, and so I would pick her up from school. We'd go back to the museum, and we'd spend time. She'd finish her homework. I'd be working, and then we'd walk out of the museum. And I thought this was the coolest thing, because at the Met, you could just walk through the hallways, and I've worked at so many institutions where it's like you cannot go, like this good institution, you cannot go into the galleries without appropriate supervision. Well, at the Met, it's amazing, it's supervised, but I was one of the people who could walk wherever, and it was fantastic. And so I'd have this little 9-year-old with me, and we'd be walking through the galleries, and I thought, oh, she's gonna talk about this when she's older. She's 16 now, she doesn't remember 90% of it, which is offensive on so many levels, but I thought it was really cool in so many ways, and I thought it was also a bit creepy. I mean, I'm a scaredy cat, so I walk through spaces that are dark, and I'm the girl that's totally like, yeah, this ain't my jam. Or the works of art, I do believe that they have resonance, and they've spent a lot of time on the planet and in different spaces, and so. There are times when I get a little scared walking through galleries. And so we would walk through the galleries, and the lights would be off. So imagine us walking through here. In fact, my offices were, if you look at the pillar behind, were in the perimeter of the gallery just above. And so we would walk through there, and so it was above the Greek and Roman galleries and just adjacent to the Art of Africa, Oceania, and the Americas. So my 9-year-old and I would walk through the galleries, and we'd walk our way through. And from time to time, I would ask her things like, so how was your day? Tell me what you learned. And we do this, what was your high today? What was your low today? And so she'd say, on this particular day, she said, as we're walking through this space, oh, my high today was, I learned how to, let me get it right because I want to make sure. She said, I learned how to run, hide, fight. And I was like, oh, what? What do you mean you learned how to run, hide, fight? And she said, yeah, we at school learned how to do this because, there's all these people coming into school shooting. This is 2018. And how many of you remember the Parkland High School shooting? What I didn't know at the time, or how we would end that year, was that there were about 24 mass shootings in the U.S. in 2018 in high schools, in schools. And so we're walking through the space, and then we go through, various galleries. We traverse the Great Hall where you see Athena and you see, all of these amazing works. And then we got here, and she said, this is what we need. This is it, TT San. That's what she calls me. We need this. If we had this, we wouldn't have to worry about anybody hurting us. It sounds a little funny, but it's kind of like the show upstairs, a little uncanny and unsettling at best. And so what I was experiencing was the power of visual storytelling in that moment. This little 9-year-old knew nothing about any of these works, but she knew that they were protective gear. I hadn't outlined anything for her. She had never walked through those spaces before. But on her own, she arrived at a very salient idea, which was that these images actually shape us and they actually can protect us, and that, oh, wow, I can inherently understand somehow how this works. And so visual storytelling or narrative art is the art of conveying stories through media. It transcends visual or language barriers. The stories often reflect societal values, struggles, and aspirations. So it's capable of evoking deep emotions, because in that moment, I was just like, oh my goodness. It also sparked thoughts and it inspires action. For her, it was like, I want to get that. I want that. All of the things that had happened in that moment were a part of the impact of visual storytelling. What's interesting, too, is she went to school and told everyone about it. And she said, we should go to the Met because we actually could copy the stuff over there. But we can make ours invisible. And we could do this and we could do that and make them lightweight. It looked like they were weighed down. And I also told her about Alexander the Great, who is here, who never fought, but he took pictures in his outfits, you know. So you see it again throughout history, because visual storytelling has played a crucial role in shaping all the world we're in. From ancient cave paintings to religious and propaganda posters, these stories have communicated complex ideas and emotions, and they've been a cornerstone of human expression. These stories have preserved our histories, conveyed our values, and shaped our collective consciousness. One of the things that I think is really powerful is that they tell us what to value oftentimes. They tell us how to think. And narrative art can also reflect the zeitgeist of the time, capturing the essence of societal issues and movements. For example, here you have Uncle Tom's Cabin playing a significant role in shaping public opinion on slavery, while you have The Grapes of Wrath highlighting the struggles of the Great Depression. There's like studies that say people picked up these books also because of the images on the cover. More recently, films like The Nickel Boys have brought historical injustice to the forefront of public consciousness. This visually inventive adaptation of Colson Whitehead's great novel follows two boys through their tenure at an abusive school in Jim Crow-era Florida. These stories are often underestimated in their ability to shape public opinion about who people are and how they should see each other. So they create cultural norms that sometimes are positive, sometimes they're negative. So consider the haunting photographs from war zones that have stirred global empathy, viral social media campaigns during elections, or compelling documentaries that have driven social change. These stories, these visual stories, bring attention to matters of import and sometimes not so important. And they mobilize facts in ways that help people act ways that sometimes challenge the world, and not always in good ways. Narrative art also has the unique ability to foster empathy and understanding. By immersing audiences in different perspectives, it can break down barriers and build connections. More and more, this is another image of our great museum that we're building in Los Angeles. More and more, people continue to see museums as just repositories, but they are not. They are the guardians of our cultural heritage. We are the guardians of cultural heritage. We preserve the stories of our past, providing a tangible connection to history and a deeper understanding of our present. They also play a crucial educational role and provide context and depth to the stories they tell, helping visitors to understand complex subjects and see the world from new perspectives. Through their collections, museums offer a window into diverse cultures and experiences, fostering a sense of shared humanity. People are afraid to share their points of view on a whole range of topics right now. It's challenging. More and more, I hear about parents telling their children to avoid talking about important issues, politics, religion, etc. Now, don't even ask your friends questions about anything at school. They say things like, if someone asks you what to think about X or Y, just say, I don't know. These ugly, divisive times are taking away what used to be, as I mentioned before, a cornerstone of democracy. The notion of debate, having a point of view, having a perspective. So given the state of our union and global issues that are ever present, I cannot say I know of any places where people actually feel safe. I think people are thirsty for safe places, protected spaces to talk, to explore, to learn, and fumble through their thoughts with people that don't share their same opinions. Now, I'm not saying that I'm not gonna like yell on somebody who is just totally ridiculous, but wouldn't it be interesting to have a space where you can do that? So in these times, in this moment right now, we need people to hear each other, to see each other, be held accountable in healthy ways without being canceled, fired, or assaulted. We need places where people can have a prompt that might change their thinking or shed a little light on an issue. I think museums can be that safer place. Not safe, but safer. A place that I think visual stories can be instructive at. They can prompt us and encourage us to have critical and divergent conversations. And studies say that we actually are some of the most trusted spaces. And what's interesting is a lot of the work that we do, a lot of the studies also say that young people and people of color aren't interested in museums. That is just not true. When you dig a little deeper into those studies, you realize it's not that they don't feel welcome, we don't feel welcome. They're just not interested in how you're doing what you do, how we are doing what we do. And so if we could create these spaces where people could feel a little safer having the conversations that they feel challenged to have in other places, using kind of like artwork as a balm of sort, we actually can create the space that might nurture a better society. So I think museums can be these spaces. And by curating exhibitions that address contemporary issues, they can provoke thought, spark dialogue, and encourage openness and action. Dare we say action come out of a museum? Examples include exhibitions on climate change, social justice, and human rights, which not only inform but also empower visitors to become advocates for things that matter to them, that they care about. So inclusive curation is essential for ensuring that museums reflect diversity of communities they serve, are interested in connecting with, care about. This involves actively seeking out and including voices and perspectives that have historically been marginalized. They're just under-considered. They're not underrepresented, they're just not considered. And so collaborative projects with community groups, artists, and scholars can enrich museum collections and exhibitions, making them more representative and relevant without just saying, put everything you want on the walls. Have an opinion, have a point of view. So curating these projects that include diverse voices and perspectives is essential for rich and meaningful dialogue. This involves engaging in ways that are very different. If you go upstairs, you look at the shows that are on view here, you see it. So on view right now is this show, which I couldn't wait to go upstairs and see. So this great museum is showing the works of Bronx-based artist Samantha Box during these times. So kudos. This show, yes, you can clap for that one. This is her first solo show, and the curator says, seeing together for the first time, these two major bodies of works, Invisible and Caribbean Dreams, reveal layers, conversations around the intersectionality of nationality, race, class, gender, and sexual orientation. This is all we're talking about right now. Thank you. So listen, museums thrive when they are deeply connected to their communities. They thrive when they're having salient conversations that are timely. So engaging people can create lasting relationships. By involving communities, museums can ensure their exhibitions resonate and reflect the experiences of those that might be featured in the show upstairs. So today I shared a little bit about the profound power of visual storytelling just for 2 seconds and the vital role that museums play in influencing societies. To sum it up, visual storytelling and the future of museums lies in making connections. It's that simple. It's our bread and butter. So I want to end by sharing a bit about the notion of connections, which occupies so much of my brain space. All I think about is you had to be there moments. I mean, seriously, that literally, from the time I heard my mother talking about the Marvin Gaye concert, she went to a Teddy Pendergrass and Marvin Gaye concert, at the Fillmore in San Francisco, and I was in the kitchen and her talking, and I shouldn't have even been listening, but she was talking about it, and she talked about what she wore, her high-waisted pants. She normally had an afro, but instead she had a dry press for the women of color in the room. You know what that is. And she had this amazing, where she straightened her hair, and it's really, really powerful. And she talked about that night in a way that made it feel like you had to be there, and I wasn't even born. So how do we create these moments that makes us desire those types of moments? So I want to share, or end by sharing a bit about this notion of making connections. So I saw this film called Past Lives. How many of you have seen this film? It's a great film. I didn't even want to go see it. I wanted to go see the film that was next door, and my friend was like, let's go to this one. And I was like, I really don't want to go. We had a whole conversation. We went, and I came out, and I was like standing outside the door for the next group of people saying, you're gonna love it. So I saw this film called Past Lives. It's a story about two young people who were deeply connected in their childhood. It focuses on them reuniting as adults after a long, long separation. The film introduces the Korean Buddhist concept of inyun, which means the connection, fate, or destiny of two people. This idea that you could be tethered to someone across place and time because of deep, deep connections. It's not a romantic thing. It's not a romantic thing. It's even beyond a spiritual thing. I have a friend like that I grew up with who's actually in the audience today. And I was so moved by this film that I talked about it to anyone. My staff, they were like, it's playing downstairs in our building. I'm like, you should go at lunch. I was buying tickets for people. It was ridiculous. So in 2023, I'm going to get back to that, but in 2023, the United States Surgeon General, Dr. Murthy, released a Surgeon General advisory calling attention to the public health crisis of loneliness, isolation, a lack of connection to our country. Over the last 5 years, our lives have been full of peril and promise, with COVID, elections, fires, etc. This year alone has had so many of us yearning for the kind of substantial relationship that you will see in this film if you go to see it, the inyun. Recently, no matter what your political affiliation or belief or current situation, this current situation, I should say, has produced a reality that has created a divided nation more so ever than ever. From what I understand, during moments like this, folks go deep into the bowels of introspection and ask questions like, what do I need to change? What do I need to make amends with? What is missing from my life? What is urgent to take care of immediately? Where should I move? How can I make things better? And most importantly, what is my purpose in the world? So when taken together and applied to the notion of museums, these questions get at the heart of what should make museums matter more than ever. In what useful ways can these institutions be reflexive as life unfolds and the conditions we're living in shift like sand under our feet? I'm going to give you a short answer, and I'm going to give you a slightly longer answer. The short answer is museums matter more and become better when they put people at the heart of their mission. I mean all people. One might ask, with all this talk about people and connections and all these other kinds of images, what about the objects, Sandra? Why aren't you talking about a work of art every time you put up a slide? Well, of course, the objects are critical, and that ought to go without saying, especially since museums clearly state more than anything, we collect, conserve, study, and exhibit works, et cetera, et cetera. But that's really not a mission. It's a list of extremely critical tasks that we must do to take care of the works in our collections. The question is not, for me, is the object important? Because it is. But the question really is, what is the purpose of collecting? What is the purpose of conserving? What is the purpose of studying? What is the purpose of exhibiting? For whom are we doing these things? The answer is for the people. And we have gotten overly consumed with it just being for the object. So that's my short answer, believe it or not. And like most short answers, it needs a little unpacking if it's going to be of any use. So to begin sketching this slightly but not much longer answer, I'm going to offer quotations from the legendary, of course, James Baldwin. I'll give you two because when you're talking about Baldwin, why not? You can't really stop at one. So here's the first quotation from Baldwin. He wrote this about literature, but you can apply it to visual art, music, education, and certainly museums. He said, "The world changes according to the way people see it, and if you alter, even by a millimeter, the way a person looks at reality, then you can change it." If you work in an art museum, I have to say, these are words we live by. We believe that art can alter the way people look at reality. It's just a part of our kind of religion, if you will. And as Baldwin says, when perceptions change, then there's a chance for reality to change. So yes, I love when people come and they're changed by the act of looking, experiencing. So while museums will always be places to see the arts and see artifacts, the challenge is to make them places where you experience the act of seeing differently. To see, not to see things, to see differently. I call this the moonshot for museums. In other words, I believe they can connect us to shape a more just society. I think they make us better. There's studies that say, like you can become healthier by looking at art, making art, doing art, etc. So the second quotation from Baldwin offers the beginning of an explanation for how art can lead to change. This is a passage in which Baldwin explains why he has no choice but to be an optimist. He said, "I can't be a pessimist because I'm alive. To be a pessimist means you have agreed that human life is an academic matter." So there it is. I am alive, you're alive, and our lives in this world we share are urgently real. They're not manufactured, they're not facsimiles, they can't be actually resolved on TikTok, Snapchat, or any of those platforms. So I'm going to propose that transformation can really happen and does happen when museums begin their work from the optimistic point of view of caring about how we live and how we care. In practical terms, what could that mean? To start with, it means going beyond worrying about how museums can make their collections relevant or make their programs and exhibitions relevant. But I think it's possible to flip the question and start by asking, what makes a life relevant? That's a question all museums face, whether you know it or not. It's everything an individual faces. It is, at a minimum, an implied question because if we want museums to live up to their best possibilities, to their highest potentials, it needs to be a part of the everyday lives of people. And right now, we sit oftentimes in close proximity or neatly adjacent. And right now, the call to action is that we are in the world and of the world. So to the extent that this change can happen, museums have to be more inclusive and equitable, and it's long overdue. This concern for public engagement and meaning-making was once considered anti-intellectual. It was reserved for, community programs, and people saw themselves as dumbing down by doing exactly what people need, what humans need. But it is now at the center of museum discourse. There is no place that museum directors and educators and artists go where people are not talking about how you move and change people. So I'm inspired when I think about narrative art or visual storytelling and how it helps us understand the world. It gives shape and character to real events, imagined realities, and systems of power. It tells us a lot. So, that is the function of narrative art, and it cuts across time and place, like in Yoon. It's one of the oldest creative impulses that you'll find, and at the heart of it is the notion of deep connection. Storytelling has always been among the main functions of art. They're rooted in religion, myth, legend, history, literature, or contemporary events. These have been sources for much of the world's artistic output. It has shaped societies, and it shapes our perceptions of each other. And I've said this before, sometimes for better and sometimes for worse. It provides a window into lived experiences, and it can elicit so much. It's effective because we all live with stories of our own. Museums have prided themselves on telling people what to think, and now people want to come and have an opinion about what's there. They inform how we view the world, and it's exciting. By engaging audiences with artwork through compelling stories, we empower people to share their own, and we can invite people to ask questions, venture opinions, be uncomfortable, be vulnerable, have a conversation with someone that they may not otherwise have one with. It can be the uncomfortable kind of space. George Lucas, who is the co-founder of the Lucas Museum of Narrative Art, once said, "Narrative art embodies the beliefs and ideals that hold communities together." This is why he founded this museum. Art not only reflects society, but it has the power to shape it. As I said, it's a moonshot. It's our responsibility to create museums, to create institutions that are not only of the world, but in the world and deeply tethered to our individual stories. We need museums to be emotional, social, and public at the same time. The young people in the past lives films were connected. Museums need to be tethered to people across spaces. I believe museums can be irresistible. I think they're magnetic. I think they're cool. I believe that we have the responsibility to evolve to meet this particular moment and address this chaos that is causing such extreme loneliness and apathy. We have a huge opportunity to connect with one another, transform our society and ourselves for the better. We need safer places more than ever, and I think we are only cheating ourselves if we don't try to make museums those places. So I urge all of us to support and engage with our local museums, visit their exhibitions, participate in their programs, and advocate for their continued funding and support. And let us recognize our visual storytelling that we actually control, and understand that if we're not paying attention, all of these images will continue to shape us and shape others in ways that actually may not be so truthful. So this art, these museums, they can move us from our comfort zones to where the magic happens. So thank you.
Well, thank you. I have my notes on my phone. While we pull down, we will have a microphone running around, but that was very positive, so thank you. That felt, in the state of everything, that felt very positive to hear your perspective, so thank you.
Thank you.
While everyone thinks of their questions, we will have some moving around. With your first story about your goddaughter, do you remember your first experience with museums?
I get this a lot. My first experience with museums. Yes, I grew up in San Francisco, in the Fillmore, which is a very specific part of San Francisco. And I went to the Science Center there and was really terrible to the sea anemones and things like that. So I was very misbehaved. I stuck my hand in a little, I did more in the touch spaces than I should. My favorite museum, though, for many years was the Exploratorium in San Francisco, where I could be, I could play, I could touch, I could dance, I could do all those things. That's not my first time I saw a work of art, though. So people always ask, I think people sometimes, those are synonymous. Yeah.
Do you remember the first time you saw a work of art?
Oh yeah, it was laminated Jesus. So you go to church and there's there's the laminated Jesus that it's a bookmark. And then I lived across the street, so that was like my first, but I think the first time I saw a work of art that I really connected with deeply was I lived across the street from a place called the St. John Coltrane Orthodox Church. Any of you know what this is? So it's in San Francisco. It's on Divisadero Street, and it was called the St. John Coltrane Orthodox Church. And I caught the bus. The 24 Divisadero stopped in front of this place. And it was a small storefront church. And when you looked inside, they were like Byzantine paintings, but it was John Coltrane in gold leaf. Massive, like big. And so it was like, he looked like my Uncle Butch. And he was a musician, and there was like beautiful flames coming out of his horn, and the choir or the musicians were jazz musicians. And so, and the minister at the church had long locks, and so that was my first time I felt like, oh, that is me, and I have a connection to it. Yeah.
That's a great answer, and I'm going to go back through my personal archives to try and think of mine, because that's a really good answer.
Yeah.
Do we have any questions? Oh, great.
Thank you. Ooh, very loud. As the leader of a new museum, you have this opportunity to gather objects for a new collection. How do you think about what does not fit in that bucket of objects, particularly with such a wide theme?
Yeah. Well, we have a collection strategy, of course, so people are kind of like, what isn't narrative art? I'm like, well, actually not much. But because you can actually apply narrative to so many things, and it's in the eye of the viewer. But the other thing that but as we're collecting in these first nascent years, we are looking at works that really obviously tell a story, that are legible to the reader, and they actually do what I was just talking about. They obviously shape a perspective. So I'll give you a couple of examples. So one of the first works that we acquired during my tenure there was a migration image by the legendary Benny Andrews, great American artist, but it told a different story about the Great Migration. We also, we have a couple of Artemisia Gentileschi's in our collection, which, are just, one of the reasons I ended up changing my major from biology to art history, because I took an intro class, and, that famous, I'm like, wow, image of someone's throat being slashed open. Another work that may not, for some people, seem narrative, but because sometimes people don't see portraits as narrative, but they really are in many ways. And so we have a beautiful Frida Kahlo, one of the most difficult paintings that I think we collected, that I think it really is emblematic of this institution's mission, is George Washington Carver crossing the Delaware, and I feel like that's one of my proudest acquisitions, a very difficult painting that sat in storage. I've curated it in a show when I was at the Whitney. Thelma Golden curated it into her legendary Black Male show. It's been heavily shown, never purchased. But it's historical and contemporary. It is art historical, and it is popular. The images in it are based on mass-produced images, but it's based on the very famous Leutze painting, George Washington crossing the Delaware. And so the best thing I could do was go back to my old job and ask, could we have it hung alongside George Washington crossing the Delaware? And they were hung, you could see them at the same time and compare them in the American wing. And the artist, Bob Colescott, that's what he always wanted. So when you're talking about building a collection, you're thinking about it in the context of all the other works in the world. And we also are dedicated to collecting the mass-produced image that shapes society. So we have a large collection of comics, large collection of images that have graced the cover of The New Yorker. So yeah, hope that answered your question.
And I was so glad that you brought up social media and the internet, because those are shaping culture so much.
Yeah.
That it's interesting. Does the Lucas collect
Social media?
Yeah, anything like that?
No, I'm gonna let somebody else handle that one. But there was a great show at the Met a few years ago on social media, artists who had taken pictures using and placed them in the social space, and they curated a show of that. So,
Interesting.
yeah.
Any other questions? Oh.
I just want to continue with the narrative art. All the examples you cite were all Western examples, and I'm just very curious if there's interest in non-Western, non-Eurocentric.
Absolutely. So there definitely, but George is really interested in American art. We do have examples of works that are non-Western, let me think, ukiyo prints, examples of West African works, sculptures. Yeah.
Great question.
It caught my attention when you brought up the picture of past lives, that silence and body language speak volumes in narration. Have you explored that topic?
That is an excellent question. I think one of the ways that, I have in my own past history in terms of work, I think, so I used to oversee all performance programs at the Metropolitan Museum of Art and did that in Seattle. We have a great artist here who performed as a part of our series in Seattle. So yes, I think movement and the lack thereof also play a major role. We're not a film museum, and so people often talk about that in the context of film. I think there are lots of programming opportunities in galleries and in spaces that will allow for silence to play a major role in it. Yeah.
Hi. You spoke about museums being safer places for communication to occur. And I think with the current political environment, part of the problem is that the opposing sides don't really get to talk to understand one another. And museums tend to be more progressive and liberal leaning. But do you think there's a pace where museums would collect artworks that reflect the opposing views that aren't as popular, like more conservative issues, that they would feel comfortable in those places too?
Yeah, I love that question. And when I say divergent points of view, I really mean that. I think a lot of times, I've worked in museums where the collections had a range of points of view. And I think the mastery of education departments and curatorial departments is that they actually foster that discourse when the institution encourages it. I think there are lots of institutions that are just trying to keep it safe, and keep it so that people aren't arguing. And I think, or they see difference as a form of arguing. I've curated programs where the work was very, very uncomfortable. We once had a porcelain artist in Seattle, whose name is, I'm remiss around right now, but who actually was a Nazi sympathizer. And we had collected a significant body of work, and he was very popular as an artist. And then it became, people started asking questions, like, are you going to deaccession these works? Well, you know, it's also kind of like the monuments conversation that, you know, do you destroy monuments? So I think that museums should be places where you can have those conversations. Now, here's the rub. The rub is that you actually have to have skilled people at the institutions that are able to have that level of discourse with people, to be able to facilitate that kind of conversation. And oftentimes we don't. And so that's something that I think we as institutions are really grappling with. How do we create those spaces? So yeah, I actually don't think that museums will always or should have just one kind of work of art. And the language you use, progressive, I don't think that that's the purpose of museums, to just have a one-note kind of experience. Yeah.
Yeah, and oftentimes it falls on the frontline staff to have to answer these questions, and so making sure that people are appropriately trained to kind of have the conversation.
Yeah, I think it's an important question. You know, I mean, we see a level of discomfort around having conversations with people that don't have the same shared opinions. And so you said at the beginning, you know, oh, this was such a positive. I was hoping it wouldn't be. The reason I didn't talk about a lot of, I give talks about specific works of art and lecture about art, particular artists all the time, and I was just really interested in this openness around what is the purpose of a museum, what is the point of a museum. Museums also we have lots of conversations at the places where I've worked where museums often feel that to be political is or have points of view or create spaces for these conversations to happen feels like you run the risk of being partisan. And the goal is not to be partisan, but be the place where people who sit in, I guess in this case, we're in DC, on both sides of the aisle or not on an aisle at all, can actually come together and have a conversation. I think that's the promise of places like museums, and I think the collections really should reflect that.
Yeah, and I think that and I view it as positive as the potential of where we can go. And, you know, all art, especially narrative art, it's political. Everything, you know, since the beginning of time. And especially now, I think there's been a cloud in DC, so it feels nice to feel this from your presentation.
Fred Rilson is a good person when you think about uncomfortable conversations and items that are not, he was just like, let's just pull all this stuff out of the collections and put it on view and talk about it, you know, as opposed to him just saying these are bad or these are good. You know, these are issues that we should be addressing. I can talk all day. I love this question. It's just such a good one. It's such an important purpose of museums, and I feel like, for lack of a better phrase, I feel like we've been so invested in prettying things up and keeping it clean is not the right word, but just, which is why people feel so uncomfortable, which is why a lot of people don't like museums, you know? And I love the idea of a dialogic space. Yeah.
And having this type of conversation, visitors as well.
Yeah.
I think we have time for one more question, if there's as good of one as we've had. Not to put you on the spot. Yep, we'll bring you a microphone.
Well, I'll just follow up on that person's question, which is a really tough one for me, because I'm someone who cannot talk with the other side of that, like, even so that's my problem. But give me some examples of what you would put up that would be sort of the other side, the very conservative. I mean, I can think of somebody. What would you put up?
What would you think of? And then we can have a conversation about it. Because you said you could think of some. Nothing's coming. I'm trying to think too, but.
Well, I mean, so much is race, but say it was a group of black guys beating up cops. Mm-hmm. I mean, it's usually the other way around, right? Mm-hmm. Or I don't know. I don't even like to even think about it, but. You know, I mean, pornography, stuff like that. But pornography shown in a, you know, it's so weird to say, but in a positive way.
Well, one of the things one of the great things about educators and museums is that you're looking at a piece of evidence, right? So a work of art is an object you're looking at, and you're there, you can just dissect it. Like, so let's talk about what we see here. And through that conversation, what makes you say that? And you start to realize that through these conversations, Philip Yinowin, a great educator, has an approach that really is called visual thinking strategies. And you only ask a few questions. So there really isn't a lot of bias here, right, in those kinds of discussions. So if it's, black guys beating up a white cop, then it's like, let's ask the group in front of the work of art, like, tell me what you see. And you end up coming to this conversation, and what happens is the discussion is led by the people in the room, as opposed to someone telling you what you're supposed to see. So you see what I'm saying? Like, I think sometimes when you're at a particular also level of participation in a museum, you end up in these spaces that sometimes the actual workshoppy stuff, the stuff that the public is generally experiencing, isn't necessarily a part of the experience of people that are, they are in a cocktail reception or in a whatever. Like, I will never forget the time Leonard Lauder came to a program, great collector, legendary contributor to institutions in New York. He wouldn't mind me sharing this story, but he came into the Met on a regular Saturday, and there were all these people like talking about these works because they were in an experience where they were being led through a guided conversation. And he was just like, what are they doing? What is this? And I was like, this is what people do every day in museums. And there are these, I've participated in or led programs where people are looking at a work of art for an hour, and it's like, we're only going to look at one object, though. We're only going to look at this one object, and we're going to look at it through so many different angles from the perspectives of the people in this room. And then at the very end, I can tell you what the artist intended. But that's really not the most important thing, forgive me, for the artist in the room. That's not the most important thing, right? It is a huge part of it. It's so important, but you can get all of that. And so I know so many artists that are also interested in what you bring to the work. A work of art that I think about that Dred Scott once hung a flag outside of a building, outside of Jack Shaman's gallery that said, a man was lynched here today, right? The famous work. That's one. It's a fact, like it's based on a historic image, and it happened at one point, and it was something that, was a flag that existed, 50, 60 years, 70 years before, and he just remade it and put it outside of a building. So but it was of a particular time in both of those situations, so it generate a discussion that's not necessarily biased. Yeah. I might not be hitting on it for both of you, but I would love to talk more about it.
Well, and I think that is a perfect example of what we try and do here at the museum. We try and foster these conversations through our programs, through our exhibitions. I'm so glad you brought up the Samantha Box exhibition that we have.
That's a great one.
Yep.
That's a great one to do exactly what we're talking about.
4th floor, it's amazing. But
we also use critical thinking strategies. Yes. That's actually our jam.
Yes. Our education team very much so uses VTS. And that, I think, is the purpose of programming, exhibitions, our museum. And so I really just can't thank you enough for your perspective, for answering these questions. Really, thank you so much.
Thank you to this great audience.
And with that being said, I welcome all of you to come to the mezzanine and foster conversation, ask some questions, and have a drink and a bite to eat. But we hope that you can join us, and thank you. Thanks for coming.